Hey, how you doing? This is John, and welcome to John's Long Box. I'm here with Mark Millar. I finally said it correctly. I've been practicing. I've been saying Millar for 20 years. And we've been talking for like 5 minutes of some gold, and like, we should go live. So,
you know, I feel all our best stuff was done in the.
I know. Good night, everybody. Good night. You missed
it. I was just saying how pleased I am. You're looking so well, and everything's good. You know, because whenever I was just saying it was like the omen the last time we were in touch, you were like, you know, we need to talk tonight, and then you're in this terrible accident and everything.
Right.
You know, I'm so pleased you're okay.
Yeah, we were working around because of the time difference between, you know, I'm a construction worker, and you know, and you're over there in Europe. The time difference was just, so we kept chasing each other, and then we nailed it down. And then I had some incriminating evidence on Hillary Clinton, and I crashed into a tree. I'm fine. For anybody who doesn't know, I cracked my neck, 2 months in a brace. It looks like it's healing. Everybody's been super wonderful to me. So thank you, everybody who's been reaching out.
Well, I'm pleased you're doing okay. And like I said to you off camera, embrace that whole anti-monitor crisis stuff. Like, give your head and just go for it. George Perez.
I should get like a big cape with a cowl and everything, right?
You would rock it. You know?
Yeah. I was thinking of that, or baby doll arms and legs and pretend to be MODOK.
But it's great. I'm so pleased you're doing well anyway. And 2 months off work, that doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah, two months off work, and I just got my first check for $170 from disability. Woo! Yeah.
You know, in Europe we get, well, not me because I work for an American company, but Europeans, especially Brits, get paid sick time from their employers. You kind of, for a little while, you get full pay. Is that not the case?
It's funny that you should say that, because I this has nothing to do with comic books. I'll do it quick. But we paid for a car, and while you have a car, you have to get full coverage. But when I paid off the car, I told my wife to reduce the insurance. She didn't listen to me. We have full coverage. So yes, I'll be getting my full pay and everything. It just takes a little longer to deal with it. So let's hear it for disobedient women rule the world. Right? I asked Mark if this would be okay if I showed my comic book campaign, and I think Mark would be interested in this because I know you're a big Bronze Age fan, and my comic is an homage to Bronze Age Marvel. Like, you know, I imagine my comic Hero Tales to be on sale next to you know, X-Men with Chris Claremont and John Byrne. Look at this beautiful Renzo Rodriguez artwork, and Hero Tales #1 features the patriarch. He's a loving father, a devoted husband, and a beloved superhero. This is Pat Broderick, one of my favorite comic book artists of all time, doing a variant cover.
That's great. I love Pat's stuff. Like his run on Firestorm, Jerry Conway's Firestorm, but I think Romeo Tangal was inking it.
Yep.
Fantastic. I loved it. Amazing.
Yeah. He's one of my favorite art. If you remember, he did Captain Marvel in the early 1970s. That's when I fell in love with his artwork. And I'm also good. I have to show this if I'm trying to do it as fast as possible so we could talk. But here, this is also on Kickstarter. Some people have a favorite platform, but on the, you know, you could get my wonderful cover by Renzo Rodriguez. This is the back cover. I just love this. Oh my God, is that awesome?
Who drew that?
This is also Renzo Rodriguez. Renzo Rodriguez is he's the full artist. He does all the interiors. He does the front cover, the back cover. And I always say that he's the love child of John Byrne and George Perez. It's just wonderful. And you know, and this is, I got Michael T. Gilbert to do a variant cover. You know, for those of you who don't know, he did Mr. Monster in the 80s and 90s. Man, I am such a fan of Michael T. Gilbert. And he asked if he could do like a Silver Age homage to Superboy. I'm sure you're probably the only one who knows exactly the issue that he's homaging there.
I know the issue. I can't remember the number offhand. I do have a weird memory, right? I've got this really strange memory where I can tell you who lettered, inked, you know, like pretty much every comic that I've owned, you know. And it's one of those things I used to think would really impress girls when I was at school. Take a book from my collection and I'll tell you who colored it, you know, that kind of thing.
You know what's funny is because I could pick out artists and the inkers and the letters. Yeah. Because I couldn't impress girls. So for me, it was the other way around. I learned that skill because they wouldn't have nothing to do with me.
Well, do you know, I was saying to you off camera, this is going to be the first campaign I've ever backed. So I'm going to back this. Like, I don't have a cell phone. I've never bought anything on Amazon, but I'm going to back this. And there's 2 friends of mine have campaigns running just now that I'm going to back as well.
Oh,
Even my own daughter had a campaign about 2 months ago, and for her first 2 graphic novels. My wife, luckily, is a bit more computer savvy, and she backs it for me, you know. But yours is going to be the first one I've ever backed. You know,
so. Wow! You're going to back my comic before your own daughter. Thank you so much.
It's so wrong. I feel like I'm your dad now. You know, so.
I feel honored. Thank you so much. So, I want to say I was a big fan of Swamp Thing, and I'm like, Swamp Thing is one of those characters I think breaks. It just makes the best. I'm saying this absolutely wrong because I'm a little nervous, but something about Swamp Thing brings out the best in all the writers. So I remember, Martin Pascoe, Len Wein, Alan Moore, and then Rick Veitch, and then some guy named Mark Millar took over, and that's how I first got into your work. You know, the root of all evil. These were some great Swamp Thing stories.
And prior to that, obviously Len Wein and it was Jerry Conway, I think, followed Len Wein. So I think Swamp Thing's a bit like Daredevil, and it's a character that not everybody knew. You know, back in the day before all the TV shows and things, nobody outside of comic book fans knew Swamp Thing. They didn't know Daredevil, but for some reason, it had some good runs. You know, like Daredevil has runs as good as anything from the more famous characters. You know, I mean, some of the greatest comics of all time. And I think Swamp Thing's kind of like that too. Brian K. Vaughan came along a little later as well. You know, so some really good people.
Yeah. That Swamp Thing, like up until like it the first run ended, it was just like it was like everybody went on to become superstars after that. It's like Jamie Delano. I'm trying to think of Grant Morrison. You know, everybody. Of course, I found out about Alan Moore through Swamp Thing. You know what I mean? And
my first issue of Swamp Thing that I got as a kid when I was I 13 or 14? I think I've been 13. Was bought for me by Alan Moore.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you knew him
No.
See, I'm a big Alan Moore fanboy. You knew him when you were a kid?
No, I didn't know.
Oh.
I went along to a comic book convention and I had an autograph book. I think it was 13. I had an autograph book and I was really keen to meet comic book people. And this was just before Alan Moore was mega famous. You know, he was very well known in the British scene for 2000 AD and everything. And he'd just done the first 4 issues of Swamp Thing or something. And I just went up to him and I said, could I have your autograph, please? And he was just standing there. He wasn't mobbed. There'd been one guy talking to him who walked away. And then I saw he was on his own. So I walked up and we talked for a full hour. It must have been like the worst hour of his life, right? But he told me everything. I asked him a million questions. And he was so nice. He was so generous with his time. And he told me he was working at DC Comics now, hoping to do a Superman annual with Dave Gibbons 18 months down the line and everything. So he told me all of his plans, how Dave Gibbons had mapped out the Fortress of Solitude for the big fight they were going to have and everything. You know, so, I mean, he was great. And at the end of it all, he said, so have you ever read any of my books? And I was like, no, I haven't. Because I only buy books with Superman in them, you know. And he said to me, well, we should check out Swamp Thing. And I said, I'll be honest, I've got no more money. I've only got my train fare home. I've only got enough money to get my train home. And he said to me, I'll buy it for you. And he actually paid for it.
Oh, wow.
The issue. And I still have it autographed. For me, it was like, you know, when Bill Clinton shook hands with JFK and that photo was everywhere in the 90s, you know? That's what it was like for me meeting Alan Moore. It was such a big deal.
I love that photo of Alan Moore meeting Jack Kirby.
Yes.
Alan Moore looks like a little kid. Like, you know. That is an awesome story. I was getting nervous. I thought you were going to say he was mean. Like
No. It's funny.
You meet your heroes. You know what I mean? You don't want to meet your heroes. Oh man.
I see this stuff online, and people will say, "Oh, Alan Moore's a grumpy guy," and everything. He's like the world's nicest man. You know. I think what happens is he'll be at a book launch or something like this, and he'll be asked 1,000 questions.
Yeah.
And somebody will then say, "Are you going to write any more comics?" And he'll be like, I've said this for 15 years. I'm not writing any more comics, you know. and then that gets reported, you know, like Moore slams comic book industry and everything. But they just ask him the same question and he gives the same answer every time. It's crazy. He's a lovely man.
I've learned the hard way that the online is not real life, you know. So and I've said stuff to people that was completely meant in frivolity. It was taken the wrong way. So I understand that. And I think a lot of people just love drama and sensationalism.
It's the currency of Twitter, but also that's what makes Twitter so addictive as well, isn't it? I mean, we're all on it. It's really fun.
Yeah.
I love the fact that I don't even. I mean, I'm a news junkie, right? I used to buy about 5 newspapers a day. I don't buy any anymore. I just everything like Twitter and online, because before BBC's got it, Twitter's got it. You know.
I'm trying to. People are asking questions in the chat, and they're going by so fast. You know. Thank you. I'm trying to pull out a question. Bronze Star. People talk about Bronze Star. One thing I wanted to ask you. One of my personal favorite comics that you ever wrote was 1985 by Marvel comic. And I remember you said that 1985 was the best year for comics. And I've always wanted to ask you, do you still feel that way? You know, and why?
I don't think that year in particular. It was the end of my childhood, I think. You know, so it's really sentimental to me. I was only 15 in 1985, so I just discovered comic shops. I'm reading Alan Moore, I'm reading Frank Miller and everything. I actually think 86 is a slightly better year, you know. But 85 actually really tied in with that story, because it's about a kid just before he becomes a little mini adult. You know, it's he and all of his friends are all still into comic books, and they find in their little small Goonies style town that the Marvel villains have found our universe, with no heroes to protect them. Every other universe in the multiverse has got superheroes except ours. And it's the idea that the villains find us and there's nobody to protect us. And these kids know the weaknesses of the Marvel villains because
they read the comics.
You know, so it was a poignant little thing for me, you know, before Stranger Things and before Super 8 and all these kind of things. This was my sort of tribute to growing up in the 80s.
Yeah, I love that comic because it's comic book nerd saved the day. You know, it's such a lovely shout out to us comic book nerds.
And the artwork's amazing. Tommy Lee Edwards artwork as well, you know. So
Nemesis, my people talking about you have a new comic. Forgive me, I didn't even talk about your new comic coming out.
No, don't worry. You know, like you've got a whole cluster of comics. The way I like to work, actually, as of last year, it works out pretty well. Which is to go silent for 6 months and then do 6 months of like tons of comics. And I did that last year with a whole bunch of books, and it went down really well. So I've done it again here. So Nemesis came out last week. Prodigy's out this week. 2 weeks' time, there's Nightclub, the sequel. Then there's Magic Order, Volume 5, and then the Jupiter's Legacy finale. It's insane, all within about 8 weeks of each other or something. So that's my only plug. I'll just say it's all good. Check it all out, and I hope you enjoy it.
It's obvious I'm a big fan. I call myself a fanboy. When I say a fanboy, I mean I get everything by like a writer, a comic company. I'm a Mark Millar fanboy.
Oh, cool, thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned the multiverse, and you know, with me and all my comic book friends, the subject of the multiverse in comic books is always coming up. What do you think of it as a concept and a plot device?
As a child, I loved it. As a teenager, I loved it. And then in my 20s, I missed it. When it was gone, I really missed it, because Marvel was always really one universe. I mean, there was the occasional alternate timeline, but generally it was a very cohesive Marvel universe. DC felt a little too Marvelized to me after Crisis. You know, like I didn't need DC to consolidate to be like Marvel. What made DC different was the fact it had the multiverse. And I loved the Earth 1, Earth 2 crossovers between the Justice Society.
Right. Those are some of my earliest and most cherished comics.
But yeah, same here. And I think my first Justice League was one of those. And, you know, so Superman of Earth 2 and all that, it was all such cool concepts. And I missed it when it was gone. But my God, I'm sick of it in the movies. Because I do think we're a species all of our own. You know, like comic book guys can handle anything. Like there's no concept too weird for us. If you think about it, we're not like the mainstream audience. Like we can, since we were children, we've been trained to handle the most bizarre ideas and then just flip it over and read the next comic. Whereas, I don't know, I think the mainstream are just like, that's where they've all checked out. You know, the mainstream are hitting eject on the multiverse. It's not worked. And Wolverine, you know, has leaned into it heavily. But at least they've done it in a sort of parody way and everything. You know, I hope Marvel let this go as soon as, though. You know, I'm fed up with it.
I find it ironic that DC made the Crisis on Infinite Earth to get rid of their multiverse.
Yeah.
And now everybody and their grandmother knows exactly what a multiverse is. It's not a hard concept to understand, you know.
I think they know they hate it. You know? No, I mean, no. My wife's a very good barometer, I think, for things, because she's a normie. Until she met me, she'd never read a comic book or anything, you know. And she hates it. She just checked out. That was her. 2019, since 2019, it's very hard to get her to go and see a Marvel movie. Whereas she, as far as I'm aware, she was happy going to see them before. She seemed to be happy when she was coming with me, But like, no, she and her friends, they've all checked out.
I've been seeing the chat. They want you to come back and write Superman. I know that you are the only bigger Superman fan than me. Superman is my favorite superhero.
Yeah.
Followed by Ben Grimm, The Thing, and I can't bear to pick up a new Superman comic. I think everybody's been missing the point.
I haven't really read Superman consistently since I was maybe 19, but I read everything from maybe 1950 until I was 19. Like I obsessively have read every Superman comic. So I do love it, but I think for me, Superman's so locked in that period. I love that run of Superman. I think your childhood is always the most the most effective one for you, isn't it? But no, there's one fan bigger than you and I, and it's my middle daughter who's 12. She's
really
obsessive, yeah. And she, in lockdown, she just became obsessed with Superman. So she read every Lois Lane comic, every Jimmy Olsen, everything, So
I started getting Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen,
Yeah, we read them from start to finish, like the very first one, 1956, whatever, we run through everything. She loves the Lois Lane stuff. It's funny, like, there's no comics like this these days, but the Lois and Lana rivalry, every issue had 3 stories in it, and every one seemed to be about Lois and Lana trying to screw each other over, my kid loved it. I mean, it's so cruel, but she absolutely adored it.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because just like within the past 2 years, I started getting into like Millie the Model and Chili Storm, the Marvel girl comics.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. It's just 2 girls just slashing each other's faces to get a modeling job, and it's so vicious.
Girls comics are hilarious. They're really brutal. Like, the ones that were in the 1960s and 70s here in the UK, girls comics used to sell like 200,000 copies in the UK, which is only 20% the size of America. They were huge, but they were brutal. It was always like, girls kept as maids trapped in cellars and all this and having the most terrible lives, but for some reason kids love that stuff. It's bizarre.
That brought up Chuck Dixon was one of my first people that I had a conversation with, and he said that girls comics were the biggest sellers, even more than superheroes at home, and then they just stopped.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah.
One thing I noticed about you is you seem to be very analytical. Like I was watching, especially with the Brian Bolland, because he's another hero of mine, and you were talking about trends and everything like that. Do you have any insight of why all of a sudden girl comics just disappeared?
In the UK or in the US?
Yeah, it's just in general, yeah. Because as far as I know, it was around the same time.
It was a very reliable seller for a long time. The reason being, of course, that girls tend to read more than boys. So it was actually very different from boys' comics. And I'll talk in UK terms, but in the UK, we tended to have war comics for boys.
Right.
And science fiction comics tended to skew very heavily male, at least 95% male readers, but there was a whole range of girls' comics, and they tended to go from supernatural to romance, with a lot of schoolgirl stuff as well, like mysteries. They tended to be stories about like what we called Enid Blyton adventures, who was the biggest children's author in the UK for half a century. And they tended to be things like, girls foiling robberies and stuff like that. So very different from the kind of stuff that boys were reading, but they were colossal. And what happened was it was actually really clever that they were mainly done by a company called IPC and another company called DC Thompson. And what they did was amazing. They would have a comic for you for when you were 4 years old. And then as you outgrew that, they put an ad for the next comic in the back of it. Then they got you when you were 8 years old. Then they would do ads for the 12-year-old comics and everything. And they also owned the newspapers. So by the time you'd finish with your teens, they would advertise their newspapers in the back of their comics, So they kind of had you from you were a baby until you were an old person.
Right.
And then some idiots came in the late 70s and the early 80s, and they said, these ones are selling bigger than those ones. Let's get rid of these 8-year-old comics. They're not as big as the toddler comics and not as big as the 14-year-old comics. And they actually broke the chain. And there was this amazing chain that had run for decades, and they broke the chain. And people got out of the habit of buying comics. They broke the generational thing that it had. And until eventually, I think there's really just 2000 AD now, really.
Brian Christoph says that neglecting the female audience. Do you think this is why manga is just exploding? I don't know about the United Kingdom, but in America, manga is the popular form of comics.
Yeah. I mean, American comics, I've got 4 bookstores near me, and there used to be maybe 6 or 8 walls of books, graphic novels, American graphic novels, and now those are almost entirely manga. There's maybe just one strip on one of the walls, like maybe 6 shelves of American comics now, as graphic novels, and that's everything. That's Indies, Marvels, and DCs, everything all packed together. So yeah, but things aren't always forever as well. That you have to remember trends are trends.
Right.
I was reading manga for quite a long time recently. But I found myself skipping over to European stuff a bit. My American comic numbers have been down for about 8-10 years in terms of what I've been reading. But I went manga for a little bit, but I'm getting a little bored with manga too, So, and I've heard that the manga sales are slightly flattening. But I'm really interested in European stuff just now. It's certainly where all the best artists are coming from, and I can connect to those stories a little better as well.
So I guess I should, there's a whole online, indie comic scenes, Indiegogo, Kickstarter, and the new one is Fund My Comic, and I'm more excited because I'm not trying to talk bad about anything, but like in 2015, the mainstream comic industry I just lost interest. It was getting too expensive. I felt like, they were too political, and I'll leave it at that. And so I kind of lost my way, and then I started getting interested in crowdfunding as for comics. I'm making my own crowdfunded comic myself, and there's just so much good. Like you can see, my whole spinner rack is all crowdfunded comics. There's just so much good stuff. Do you feel like, does that have legs? Are you interested in that?
I'm very interested in it, actually. I think what's going on just now is there's a generational shift coming, and I don't think it's comic trends tends to be in 20-year cycles. They tend to be, if you look at it like 1935 to 1945, 1945 to 1955, there tends to be like a really hot decade and then a slightly running out of steam decade, with a peak in the middle, approximately. It's like a line graph, when you look at it, in terms of interest, enthusiasm, sales, all these things. And we're just in one of those down periods that comes every 20 years. But I think we're also in something bigger. I think there's a macro trend as well, which is like for the first 40 years of comics, it was all newsstands. Then the next 40 years, it's retailers, comic book specialist stores. But I do think there's something new emerging. I think we're always going to have the retailer stores, to some extent. But the price of comics now at $5 a pop is crazy. It's quite unsustainable. The numbers are down so much and everything. I just feel as if people are trying lots of new things, and I think that's such an interesting period to be working. People are trying crowdfunding, they've tried digital comics, original graphic novels and everything. Somebody is going to pop with something. Right. Somebody's going to do the way that nobody could have imagined what Phil Seuling did, back around 1980 with the direct market, and save the industry. I think somebody's going to come along, probably some guy who's in his 30s or 40s or something like this, and completely reinvent the whole comic thing, and it's going to be amazing. And that's what the next boom is going to come on the back of, I think.
What you said before about comics, they got you as a kid. I remember Mom taking me to a store, and my little sister got like an Archie comic, and I got a superhero comic, But there's really nothing for little kids anymore. I remember Marvel had that Star line, and then there was Archie and Wendy. But now comics, they're for people my age. I really feel it's a shame that little kids. I tried to give all ages comics to my friends' kids when they came over, and they were looking at the comic like, what is this? They didn't even know what a comic book was.
Well, one thing I'm fascinated by, though, is that whenever people do all ages comics, like Superman or Batman or something, and I worked on one for 18 months, they basically try and make them look the way they did when we were kids, right? And that doesn't appeal to modern kids, so the people who were picking up Superman adventures, Batman adventures, weren't children that tended to be 40-year-old men, so like, who were nostalgic for the kind of comics they grew up with. Whereas you look at something like Dogman, and I think the last Dogman book that came out, the first printing was 5 million copies, right? So kids are absolutely literate in terms of comics. Like my youngest daughter, who's now 10, she's a little old for Dogman now, but last year and the year before, it was all she drew, all she read, she adored Dogman, So we just have to find a way, I mean, it might be the end of the monthly format as well. Like Dogman as a size and a price point really works, like that size just works for young kids. So that might be something we might be going down that route. I just think there's lots of avenues to explore. And crowdfunding is one of them. I think crowdfunding is really interesting. I just have the time to kind of get into it. But I'd love to dip my toe in once and just sort of see what happens. I think it could be really fun.
You let your daughter test the market, right? She's the canary.
Yeah. Always let your kids walk in front.
Yeah, here you go. You go over there. You check that out. There's two big questions I've always wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
You were on my friend Yang's channel a couple of weeks ago, and you said that the direct market saved comics in that it created a whole bunch of genres of comics. And and I'm not going to argue with you, but I was always of the opinion that like the newsstand was where we got the new kids. It was kind of like the drug dealer on the corner. Here you go, kid. Here you go, kid. And then once they got hooked, they went into the direct market. And I feel with the end of the newsstand, you don't feel that it hurt comics at all? Because
here's a question I've got for you, right? This will blow your minds because this really struck me. The newsstand worked because Marvel used to publish about 15 titles and DC published about 18 titles. So a newsstand could have all of those books. What newsstand now could hold the 200 books that these guys do? And then on top of that, the 500 independent books that your comic stores got as well. So there's no newsstand in the world will hold those 700 monthly books. And even if they do, they're getting one copy of each, and that's still 700 copies.
Yeah, well, I was thinking, the newsstand will have like Superman, Green Lantern, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, just the hot comics. And then you find out that there's the
I think there's certainly an argument for taking very mainstream comics and repackaging them for the newsstands. But if you try and base your business model on just the newsstand now, newsstands can't even sell newspapers anymore.
True.
And they pretty much don't sell magazines. Magazines are selling like 30%, 20% of what they used to sell. So your actual reach is going to be surprisingly small. And in the UK, for example, they repackage Marvel and DC books and bring them out in the newsstand through Panini. And they do fine, but they don't do enough to sustain the page rates that American companies have to pay. But you could if you just move to newsstand and lose the comic stores, you lose every independent.
Oh no, you got to keep the comics. I love comic stores, man.
It'd be a disaster. So my entire career would basically have ended with Old Man Logan. That would have been it, So I would never have had Millar World and Netflix and all this kind of thing, So the comic stores is amazing. I mean, it's like
I spent I worked in 3 or 4 different comic book stores.
Yeah,
and my comic book store had Dave Sim come. I was a 12-year-old little kid. It had this picture hanging up of me, chubby little 12-year-old me, getting a comic book signed by Dave. I didn't even know what Cerberus was, but hey, a free comic book autographed, right?
So how old are you, John? What age are you?
I'm 56. I'm an old.
You're 2 years older than me, so we probably grew up reading a lot of the same stuff, and finding we're bang on that demographic of guys who would have started reading in the newsstands and then gone for the crack cocaine of the comic shop, the guy selling his dope on the newsstands. We then went for the crack cocaine of the comic store, didn't we?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We were there for Frank Miller, Alan Moore, and all this amazing stuff in the 80s, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, I remember when the first comic book store opened up in my area in New York. I was like, what is this? Like, I was standing in the rain, like, coming soon, the Incredible Pulp. I rode my bicycle the first day. And the funny thing is, I borrowed Tommy's bicycle, rode there, got my comic books, and then walked home. And Tommy's bicycle got stolen, and he's never forgiven me for it.
America has, I don't know, technically about 2,000 comic book stores now, maybe a little less. And every single one of those guys takes the risk. Like, they order the books and they don't get to return them the way the newsstand was.
Right.
So, I mean, the fact that we've got 2,000 guys, ambassadors for comics out there all over America, selling our stuff and taking all the risk. I mean, what a gift. I mean, any industry would kill for that. Imagine any other industry having people who love the stuff that much, they base their entire life and business around what you're trying to sell.
Oh, I don't get many super chats, so I guess I got to hail John and the great Mark Millar. Looking forward to seeing John this Sunday on Well-Read Reviews discussing Godlike. Yeah, we're gonna do a review this Sunday. I don't do too many reviews, so this is a rare occurrence. I know. My whole internet presence, I just talk about comics. Like Sundays, I take out a copy of Fantastic 401 and I show people the ads, the letters pages, which makes me want to ask you, how do you feel about slabbing comics? CGC.
I've never really. I appreciate it. Because I love these things as well, but I think I'm so sloppy, you know. I think like I'm the sort of guy that just kicks. I read a comic and then chuck it to one side, and then I see it lying there 2 days later. And that's how I discovered comics. My brothers, I've got 4 older brothers, and they would read comics and just toss them out the bed. And then I'd find them on the floor and I would read them, you know. So that's kind of, I store my comics under the bed and, you know, under tables and things, you know. So, I mean, I don't really have anything that valuable, you know. The weird thing about growing up when I did is that there was no, nothing that really went up in value the way 60s comics did, you know. So my brothers had all the early Fantastic Fours, early Spider-Man, all that kind of stuff. But for me, I had things like Superboy number 36, now worth $2, you know, that kind of stuff.
It's funny because that same comic book store, I remember walking in there the day it opened, and he had Amazing Fantasy 15, he had Fantastic Four #1, and he had Uncanny X-Men #1, $60 a piece. And this was like 83, 84, and I'm like, who would ever spend $60 on a comic book?
You know, I didn't know if I've ever told this story. When I was about 14, a guy showed up at my door one night, and it was 2 guys, and they had a giant black bag with them, like this huge big garbage bag. And they said, "Are you the guy that's into comics, right?" So I must have just been known in the neighborhood as this, right? And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Look, I don't know if you want to buy any of these." He said, "My granddad died or something like that, you know, just some relative died." And this was 1984, 85 or something. He says, "I've got all those old comics here." He was really into old comics. And I was expecting it just to be crap, you know, and all torn. And I opened it up and I looked in. And the first thing I saw was Spider-Man #3.
Oh my!
Amazing Spider-Man #3, Fantastic Four #6, and things. Oh. And this was just at the top of a huge pile. And I took some of them out and put them in the floor in my hall. And my dad came out and he was like, "What's going on?" And I was like, "These guys are trying to sell me these books, you know." And I had a look at it all, and I was like, "Guys," and I can't. This is how honest I was as a kid, right? And I said, "I can't afford to give you the money these are worth." I said, "These are worth a fortune." And they were like, "We'll give you them all for like £5 for the whole."
They just wanted to go get some beer money.
It was insane. It was absolutely insane. And I said, no. This is worth thousands. This is worth thousands of pounds, probably tens of thousands, really, you know. And I said, this is worth a lot of money. I said, there's a guy I know who's opened a comic shop in Glasgow. I said, if you take it in there, and I wrote down the address. I said, take it in there, and they'll give you real money for this. I can't afford to give it. And they looked a bit disappointed, and they went off. And then I was in the comic store at the weekend, and the guy said to me, "Oh, that was amazing. I gave these guys like 20 quid." And I got this amazing. So I think this guy funded his shop for about 2 years.
Wow.
So it was kind of stupid of me, but I think I could never have lived with the guilt.
Too honest.
Yeah.
I remember I was in my comic book store, and I would call it the A to Z. I would start at A, and I would just quietly go through it. And they left me alone. I would go around all the stores, pick out the comics I want. You know, I was a whale. You know what I mean? One of those guys. Yeah. And this kid came in with a bag. He goes, "Hey, you want to buy comics?" And the owner of the store said, "I sell the comics here. I pay the rent. I pay the taxes. I sell the comics. Get out." And something went off in my head. I said, I'm going to go out there. So I went out there and I said, "What do you got?" He goes, "I'll sell you everything in this bag for $15. So I opened it up. Daredevil #1. And I'm talking pristine condition. You know, I was like,
it's amazing.
So I gave the kid, I didn't even look at anything else. I just took the whole bag, and then I went into the comic book store. I'm like, "Look at this." I was like, and he was like, "Oh." I was like, "Be nice to kids." So there you go.
One of my friends here, he's a television presenter called Jonathan Ross. He's got the best collection I've ever seen. Do you know Jonathan?
Yeah, he did the looking for
yeah. Now that room that we were all talking in that documentary, that's his comic book room, and it's in a sort of. He's got this. It's an unusual setup where he has a property on his grounds. And he's got that as a kind of comic book haven. It's amazing. It's loads of original artwork and lots of comics. And he's got 3 copies of Amazing Fantasy 15. 3 copies of it. And then he's got the best collection I've ever seen. And I was like, why are you
handling it in that video? I was like, "Get it out of your hand, you maniac."
3 copies. And he said he likes to bag one, have one on his wall, and one to read. So he's got 3 copies of Amazing Fantasy 15. Amazing.
Oh, wow. Every time anybody mentions comic book room, I have to show this picture. This is right behind me. That's my comic book room.
I saw that online today. That's amazing. How many comics do you reckon you've got there?
I'm up to 58,000 comics.
Wow.
I pretty much got nearly everything Marvel put out, except for I think I'm missing 2 or 3. I'm missing Amazing Fantasy 15, Fantastic Four #2, and I think Fantastic Four #4.
Man, if I'd only hung on to that garbage bag filled with comics, I could have helped you out.
Yeah, you could have helped me out.
But are you still buying them now, or did you stop in 20?
Since my interest in newer comics, mainstream comics, has been waning, I've been buying plenty of back issues. Like I just read this today while waiting for you. Justice League number 13. You know, I don't know about you. Well, I never really liked Silver Age DC as a kid. That was for children. I was a cool Marvel kid. I'm loving the charm of this stuff now.
So charming. It's so charming. No, I was always a DC guy, actually, and I think it was a distribution thing, because in Scotland, DC comics were in colour and Marvel comics were 3 years late and in black and white. Believe it or not, we got them in black and white. So DC always seemed more glamorous to me. It was like Technicolor. You know?
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That. And England, you guys had, or Scotland, where you are, you had weekly comics, right?
Yeah. You would never believe this, but like Scotland's only 5 million people, and there's a comic that comes out every Christmas called Oor Willie, and I think it did 1 million copies every Christmas in a country of 5.5 million people, which is insane, isn't it? But even in the UK in general, loads of people just bought weekly comics. There was a comic called The Beano, a kids comic that was our Dennis the Menace character came from, and it sold, at its peak, it sold 2 million a week. 2 million a week. And the Dandy sold about 2 million a week as well. So we maybe had 30 comics, about 30 weekly comics that all sold between 150,000 and 2 million a week in a country 20% the size of the US. It was crazy. You know, we did really well.
We had that. My dad, talked about everybody had comics. Everybody had comics so much that you paid no mind to them. You threw them on the ground, whatever. Because they were just everywhere. And then the 50s came with that, seduction of the innocent, and it really, really killed. Like, that's when people started hiding. Did that affect the United Kingdom at all? Did comics go through that like shameful period that we had?
No. Ours never actually. They were never. There was never anything too naughty, because they were all available on newsstands. And the companies were quite conservative that owned them. They got a little naughty, maybe IPC comics like 2000 AD and Battle and Action. Those were pretty naughty around about 1976-ish, that stuff then. But generally, no comics. They never had that dip that American comics had in the 50s as well. That the sales stayed really, really high. In fact, one of the biggest comics in the UK was called The Eagle, that was out in the 1950s, probably the most famous British comic of all time, with Dan Dare. And that was riding really high when all the American stuff wasn't quite selling. Because remember, American superheroes nobody bought for a decade and a bit. It took the Justice League and then Stan and Jack to kind of reinvigorate it all.
Yeah. So would you say that DC overall was just more popular in the United Kingdom? Like you said, Marvel was 5 years later.
Depended on your neighborhood, a lot of my friends were able to access American Marvel comics that were in color. So somebody's just said there used to be a weekly comic about a soccer player in the UK. Can't remember the name. That's Roy of the Rovers. Roy of the Rovers was a massive book, Roy of the Rovers. And it was about a guy playing football every week. Can you imagine how boring that would be? Right? He's literally on the pitch kicking a ball about, and that's what the comic was about. And every boy in my class bought it. Crazy.
Oh wow! I didn't even. I love finding out new stuff. I didn't know anything about that. Like, as much as I'm a big comic book buff, like Dell Comics and Gold Key, like I those were before my time even. So yeah. I'll go to garage sales. That's one of my things. I like going to garage sales and buying collections of people.
Yeah. Well, in the UK, they used to actually bring this stuff over as ballast in ships. So they would literally just toss it into the ships all tied up and string and everything. And sometimes you would get comics that were 15 years old on the newsstand. So you would actually head into your local store to buy an ice cream or something, and you'd see a comic from 10 years before you were born.
Oh, wow.
Just as if it was a new comic, So I would see things like Dell Comics and Gold Key Comics with Star Trek and everything in the 80s. So William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy on the front of a comic in the 80s from 1968.
With not even the curly William Shatner hair, the original.
No, the proper, it was actually William Shatner's hair.
Yeah. Wow. I know you have a busy schedule. I'll ask you one more question. I've been catching a lot of grief on this, and maybe I'm wrong enough, but I always thought like some of the best comics of all time, the most lasting comics, came out during the era of the Comics Code Authority. Mm-hmm. And I think, maybe some art through adversary, and I know it's censorship and it was born out of like fear and everything, but what are your thoughts? Did the Comics Code Authority help comics, or did they hinder comics?
That's a really good question. Nobody's ever actually talked about this. I know why it went away, though. There is a secret reason why it went away.
Oh,
I don't
everybody get close.
And it was Marvel. Marvel had to do all these real cost-cutting things. When I started 24 years ago at Marvel, there was just no money. I mean, if you went to the Marvel office, you didn't even get a cup of coffee. You know, it's like they were broke. And I remember they were looking for ways to save cash. So they came up with this really clever idea. One of them was, do you remember they had a previously page at the beginning of the comics?
Right.
So a 22-page comic became 21 pages.
And it was physically smaller. I remember putting them and bagging them and boarding them. Like the comic book itself is smaller and lighter.
But they'd actually they would remove a page of script and art and put a previously page at the beginning so that new readers knew what happened in the previous issue. That was the excuse. But the reality was they realized it would save pencils, inks, colors, and letters. You know, they just got the writer, you know, to basically type something and they just used that. You know, they got a designer to set it up. And I actually see across a line of 80 books, it actually saved a lot of money because, you know, each page is costing hundreds of dollars. So every year they saved hundreds of thousands of dollars by dropping that page. Similarly, the Comics Code, every time Marvel brought out a book, they had to submit it to the Comics Code Authority and they had to pay money for them to read it and review it and make sure it was okay. And then Bill James, I think it was, said, why are we paying these guys? Like, we could save a little bit of money here. This is great. And they just cancelled the arrangement, you know, and it was actually a cost-saving thing, which is genius. I
didn't even know that. And I know Marvel I'm an electrician, and I was the electrician at Marvel Comics from 2010 to 2012. Yeah. And I was like, you know, I started working years before for this company, for the building. Yeah. You know, I was the building electrician. And I said, when Marvel, I'm going. So
you were the electrician as a fan. You were also the electrician for the building.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible.
And I, you know, I would I remember setting up my ladder in the middle of an editorial meeting, and I'm up in the making splices and I'm listening to them. And one of the editors was like, yeah, let's talk about, because they were trying to push the Inhumans over the mutants, you know, because of the Sony deal. And they're like, yeah, the Inhumans, they debuted in the Avengers comics. And I'm like, no, they didn't. It's Jack Kirby. and I was really like the angel and the devil's on my shoulders. Do I get off this ladder and inform them that they're wrong?
Oh, my God.
You know, I'm going to get fired. But, you know, my comic book, you know, so I just bit my tongue and I kept quiet. And I remember the big deal was Kick-Ass was coming out. We were talking about Kick-Ass with, you know, it's funny because all the construction guys knew the comics. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, I'm on the floor with all the accountants talking comics with them. It was just numbers. They didn't know who, you know, John Romita Sr. was my partner at work, his next door neighbor. We used to go to his house and, you know, have lunch, with John Romita Sr. You know what I mean? It was a great time to be a comic book fan. But my point being is, when I was at Marvel, the lights were flickering, the carpets were dreary. You know, there was 100 people pushed into space. I was just like, never meet ye heroes. Like I expected to go to Marvel and everybody's like paper airplane fighting and throwing Captain America shields and web slinging around.
It was kind of like that when I was there. Honestly, like I left around about 2009-ish, 2010, when my Hollywood thing was taking off. And like, but when I went there from 2000 until, like I say, about 2009. It was non-stop fun. It was amazing. Everybody got on with each other really well. We just had an absolute ball. It was amazing. And it was exactly what I wanted it to be. Joe Quesada was in charge at the time. And we just had, like, we would do a 12-hour meeting or something, right? Something crazy. And then we would go out and just drink all night. We'd have a pizza maybe or something like that. And we'd come in I'd always say, I'm going to try and get to bed at midnight tonight, you know, so I'm not too bad tomorrow morning. And Garth Ennis and I would be out drinking usually till 5:30, 6 a.m. in the morning, you know. And sometimes Garth and I would stay out so late that we would go for breakfast somewhere in the morning. And then I would go into a Marvel meeting at 9 o'clock and I'd been awake all night, you know. So, I mean, it was amazing. It was such fun. I think I maybe got the last great decade at Marvel, you know, because it really, I had nothing but good times. It was brilliant.
So I know Garth Ennis could drink. He's famous for that. But which one of the American staffers could hold up with you guys?
Joe Quesada, funnily enough, I thought was an amazing drinker. But then I found out I did a podcast with Joe a few weeks ago, and Joe said to me, "No, I just always made it look as if I had a drink." And he didn't want to get too drunk because he was the boss and he wanted to, you know, stay kind of in control. So Joe would have one drink and he'd slowly drink the same drink all night and make it look as if he had 20 pints, you know. I know Garth and I were probably the heaviest drinkers. Axel Alonso was a pretty decent drinker, if I remember right. Yeah. Everybody held their own. Everybody did well. Brian Bendis, weirdly, I assumed was a big drinker, but he's an absolute teetotaler. He didn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he must have just thought. And Brian's the world's nicest guy, you know. So Brian still stayed out with us all quite late, and he must have thought these guys are idiots, you know, like because the drunker and drunker we were getting, we must have just sounded worse and worse, you know. And Brian's a nice cerebral David Mamet fan and everything. He must have been like, oh, what am I doing with these clients? You know? But you know, Garth and I, we'd always, there was always a pub we used to go to that I've never been to sober, so I don't know where it is, right? So we would finish up about 3 a.m. and then we would go to this other place. I don't know what it's called, but it had a dartboard, and Garth and I would be standing throwing darts all night, from 3 till maybe 5-ish, and we never once hit the board. Never hit the board. We were always just
this is in New York.
In New York.
Oh wow!
There was a great bar we used to go to that's closed now on University Avenue called the Cedar Tavern, which was a really great bar. I used to go there a lot, and I'd maybe do about 4 hours there after work. 4 of the hours we were out. But I remember one night I used to have these Mellow World drink ups because I used to have the Mellow World boards at the time, back when we all used to have message boards. And I would, wherever I went in the world, I used to say to people, hey, if anybody fancies going for a drink, I'm going to be in the Cedar Tavern at 10 o'clock tonight. And you get like 50 guys showing up. You know, it was always really good fun. But I remember one night we got stiffed. Somebody started a tab in my name. And, and it was about $2,500 or something, right? And I remember I had about $80 on me or something, you know.
Oh my God!
Joe Quesada, to his credit, I've still never paid him back, but Joe went in and paid the bill for me.
Oh, that is an awesome story. That is funny. Do you ever work with like one of my heroes, or a couple of my heroes? I got to ask you about George Perez, John Byrne, Jim Shooter. Do you ever work with any of them?
It's so weird you mentioned those names, right? Jim Shooter and John Byrne, I've been trying to get on my podcast for months.
Oh, I had Jim Shooter. Jim Shooter came and talked for hours. He's such a great guy. John Byrne, I email him once a month and never hear anything.
Really? I almost had John last month. It was so close.
Oh my God, that's my holy grail.
And we had a mutual friend who hooked us up, and because I've never met John Byrne actually, and I dropped him a line and I said, some guy said, I apologize for opening a tab in your name.
you owe him $2,000 there, Albert. Well, you owe Joe Quesada $2,000.
But John Byrne, he said, yeah, let's do it next week. And then it kept getting bumped back, and then he had decorators in and everything. And I was like, oh, when's this going to happen? So it still never happened. Jim Shooter, I've been talking through a third party, but then that fizzled out as well. George Perez, sadly, you know,
yeah, the nicest man in comics, man.
Everybody loved George Perez. I never met him ever. I was never even at the same convention, as far as I know, that he was at. I would have absolutely loved to have worked with him. I remember his run. I know everybody talks about Teen Titans and things, you know, and obviously Crisis on Infinite Earths, but his run on Justice League is one of my favorite runs of all time.
That's why I'm building up to it. I don't want to read it without the proper context. You know what I mean?
Well, do you know, Jerry Conway wrote Justice League for about 6 years, and Jerry's a very underrated writer. I mean, the British guys all kind of come in and stole the American writer's thunder, but Jerry was amazing, you know, it still is. But like, I think it was around about issue 189 or something. Jerry had Perez working with him, and they were together until about issue 209 or something. And that run of Justice League is unmatched. I think it's some of the best DC comics of all time. So let me know what you think of them, because I really love them.
Yeah, I read them as a kid, but now I want to read. You know, I got all the missing issues, and I want to sit down and read them all in order. Yeah, I'm a George Perez fanboy. Absolutely, yeah.
Well, round about issue 195, there's a 3-part crossover with the Justice Society that's just heaven. And that was my introduction to the Justice Society. I was like an Earth 2 Superman and everything. It was just the coolest concept I'd ever heard. So like, no, you'll love it. You'll love it.
Yeah, I happened to get the first appearance of Power Girl. I don't know where I got it. Just showed up. I think my brother. So I was like, what is this whole other universe with another Superman and Flash? And I was fascinated with the Golden Age DC characters over the modern age. So
I'm so pleased to be finally sort of getting the Earth 2 grey at the side of my hair. You know, like just here as well.
I got to read Richards too.
I couldn't wait to become that guy, you know, and my fear was always, I didn't want to lose my hair before I could be the Earth 2 version of myself, you know, so, but it's finally happening, it's good.
Are you going to grow a goatee and become the mirror version of yourself?
Because I'm kind of ginger, you know, the goatee looks horrible, you know, it's like, it's a horrible wispy little thing, it looks like a cat's pubic hair or something like that. It's awful, you know.
Well, we've been talking for almost an hour now. Is there anything you want to say? You've been so generous with your time. This is wonderful. I've been laughing for an hour.
You know, it's so nice to actually talk proper comics, you know, because most people talk movies, you know, and like, you know, actual hardcore comic chat, you know, and you're into all the same stuff I'm into, so it's a total pleasure.
Well, you know, I started this channel during COVID because, you know, I don't know how it was in the UK, but in the United States, I was living in New York City and it was a total lockdown. You know, I was fortunate enough that I never stopped working. I was working on the George Washington Bridge. So I would go to work with 3 other guys, come home, my wife's working, and I have to be quiet because she's working from home. Go to work with the same 3 guys, you know, and I got into a little bubble. And these guys, if I mentioned comic books, they would just look at me. You know what I mean? It was sports. And then I came home and so I said, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. And for 2 years, I was talking to nobody, but you know, and then guess what? I went out of my way and I called up, blind called Captain Ironwood, and she decided to come on my channel. Oh, I don't know if you're a fan of hers, you know.
Oh, I mean that run of Eclipse comics and everything is.
Oh my God, she is to me one of the biggest legends in comic books that does not get enough credit. You know, her and Karen Berger are 2 of my legendary.
Karen's the most important editor who ever existed.
I'm not going to argue that point at all. So she came on my channel, and then I said, you know what? If I can have her come on, so I just started blind calling people. You know, what do they say? No, you know who I've been talking to? Doesn't want to come on my channel, but he's invited me over to go to dinner. Is Larry Lieber.
Oh my God!
I just blind called Larry Lieber, and he was just like, call. You know, he's like, I'm 94 years old. Nobody calls me anymore. And he calls me a nice young man, and we talk every couple of days. And you know,
I love that.
Yeah.
So is he East Coast or West Coast?
He lives in Manhattan. I'm not going to dox the poor guy, but he lives in Manhattan. You know what I mean?
Oh man, you must do this.
I have to, yeah. As soon as this thing comes off, as soon as
is he going to come on the show? Or
he won't. He doesn't want to be. You know, he doesn't know how to do it. He doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
He's old timer. He said I could record the telephone calls and stuff. You know, I blind called Dave Sim. Dave Sim and I talked for 2 months every night. You know, I told him about that picture that he goes, I still have that picture, but I don't want to come on your podcast. You know, I was like, oh well. So you know,
there's something weird. Like comics, the guys actually quite often last a long time, don't they? Like the fact that Larry Lieber's 94, that Stan lived to his mid-90s. You know, Joe Kubert, Jerry Robinson, all these people, they lived to really good ages. And it's so unlike, you know, people who sit down all day. Normally people who sit down all day die at about 40, you know? Yeah, even though we're all sitting down, we seem to live quite a long time, which is amazing. I didn't even know Larry Lieber was still alive. That's incredible.
I know. I
love that.
94, you know, and he just had surgery on his eye. So I literally called him the day of his surgery. He got home and he was like, I just wanted to talk to somebody. I was like, Larry Lieber's a legend. Why aren't people calling him?
Yeah.
You know? And I wanted to talk to him about Atlas Comics from the 70s. He goes, I don't want to talk about that.
Do you know, John, it's blown my mind that you were doing the electrics in the Marvel building. I mean, statistically, the chances of that is so remote. You would be in there regularly. You know, listening to all them. And they'd have no idea that you would actually be a fan as well.
I was biting my tongue. Biting my tongue. I wanted to cover, But Brian Bow, who does this comic, Wolfenbach, he calls me the Forrest Gump of comics.
Because you know everyone. But you know, that's what I like about comics too, is that it's kind of a small industry, isn't it? So you do get to know everyone really quickly.
Right. Yeah.
And especially with the internet. You know.
I just went to this Vaughn Coleman who's doing a comic called Phenomenova. He called me up. He said, let's go to New Jersey. Graham Nolan's having a party. So open invite. So I next thing you know, I'm talking to Graham Nolan. You know, I met Pat Broderick. You guy drew my cover. I finally met him. It was awesome. You know, met absolute legends. Dan Frago was there, the nicest guy I've ever met in comics. It was such a pleasure.
Dan Frago is such a great name as well, isn't it?
It is. Isn't it a cool name? And he looks exactly like Sam. I love it. Cool guy. I love talking to people about comics. I love talking about comics. You know, it's the greatest hobby in the world. Like people always ask me, what do you like about comics? I said the imagination, the world. Like you show me a movie. I remember when Terminator 2 came out. We were everybody, all the normies were excited about it. All my cousins stuff we were talking. And I said, Jack Kirby did that 30 years ago with The Absorbing Man.
Yeah.
I said, you show me something cool and I'll show you Steve Ditko or Jack Kirby or these guys did this 30 years ago. And, you know, they thought I was pretentious.
And
but I agree with them. I am.
The guys who made the movies read the comics. You know they read the comics. Like Star Wars, I mean, it owes everything to Jack Kirby, doesn't it, as well? Just a few years before.
Yeah. Dark Side, and it was a inspiration for Darth Vader.
Oh yeah, I mean the source, the Force. You know, I mean, there's a million things. People just have to look it up, but it was only once it was pointed out to me. You know, like I was, oh my god.
Yeah, sometimes things are so obvious they're pointed out. I'm like, how did I not realize that for 30 effing years? The
one that blew my mind. I mean, I was thinking of everything about the Silver Age. I've read a million books on it and everything. But I was in a comic store recently, and some guy had said to me that the Superman family of characters, you know, like Supergirl, Super Monkey, all these things, is all based on Captain Marvel.
Right, did you know that? Marvel did it first, yeah.
But I hadn't really thought about the context of it, but basically Otto Binder and the guys who were doing Superman at the time said, look, sales are sagging a little bit. What can we do to make this popular? What's currently popular? And they basically swiped it off from Captain Marvel, which I had no idea. Like that's Superman.
Captain Marvel was a reaction to Superman, and then Superman reacts to Captain Marvel. You know, I'm a big Captain. I love that red costume with that yellow lightning bolt, and then the cape down. It's the coolest.
Great design, isn't it? So good, so good.
And then you had Marvel Man, which was that whole story about how Michelangelo owned the rights and Alan Moore didn't know it. Do you know how that's whole story?
Do you know, I was actually in a pub a few years ago and I was talking to some guy and he said to me, and he was a musician in a band, right? And he said to me, do you know I own 10% of Marvel Man? I was like, what? And he bought it off some guy in a pub or something. There was somebody selling part of the rights to Marvel Man off. He just needed to make a quick $5,000 or something, and he sold the rights. I don't know who it was. It was some. That's why it was so complex for Marvel to get the rights to this. Because they had to pay off a ton of guys, and the guy was telling me he was negotiating with Marvel for some preposterous amount of money for that 10% of Marvel Man that they didn't have.
Wow, that is funny. Oh, my friend Fabrizio Aiello, who does this comic, Horace H. Hoover. He wanted me to ask you, he goes, is there only one restaurant in Glasgow and that's where you go and meet all the movie stars?
That's true. I was in a restaurant with my daughter the other night. We've got a place back in Glasgow still, and I go there for holidays. And I was there last week and I saw Brian Cox in it, you know, from Succession. And but it's weird, like a couple of weeks before when I was up, I saw somebody else. Glasgow's kind of weird, you know, there's always a movie getting made somewhere, you know, because it looks a bit like New York. The same guys who built a lot of New York also built Glasgow. So it's very expensive to film in New York and it's quite cheap to film in Glasgow. So quite often Gotham City or whatever, or Indiana Jones in the last movie and everything, they're in Glasgow, which is quite cool. So quite often just in the pubs and restaurants, you see a lot. It's like LA, you see movie stars. It's crazy.
Oh, Mark complimented Narwhal as a great storyteller. He's also a great guy in person. What is Mark's favorite work from Narwhal? Narwhal is great.
Well, this is a bit of an exclusive. I'm doing a project with him, actually. I'm doing a project at the moment. So that's my favorite project with Narwhal. I think
the favorite project is the one I'm doing. There you go.
I've loved this stuff. You know, I mean, I've checked it out online on these crowdfunders and everything for maybe 3 or 4 years now. And he actually blows me away. Like there's so few artists who really surprise me. You know, like when you first see Alex Ross, where you're like, I've never seen anything like this before, you know, or you first see Jim Steranko or something, you've never seen anything like it. Narwhal's like that. Like Narwhal has perspectives I've never seen before. And I almost can't believe what he can do with a page. He's so good. I'm so pleased to be working with him.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He's one of the guys I've had on my channel before. He's just a solid guy. Another guy who just loves comics. And like you said, he has a weird, and weird is a good thing in my mind, a weird way of looking at everything. And Alex, I'm sorry I missed your super chat. I'm geeking out and having so much fun that I apologize that I missed your super chat. Oh wow, I'm blown away that you're doing something with Narwhal. That is awesome.
Yeah, it'll be out next year. It'll be a little while before it's out, but we're doing it right now. We're making it at the moment, you know. And I'm so pleased to be working with him because I'm an absolute fan of him. It's brilliant seeing somebody new coming through. Like I look on comics Twitter quite a lot, and I look for new artists, and I've found some amazing people that way. The guy drawing the current Nemesis series, I found that way, Valerio Giangiordano. He his work just jumped off the screen when I saw it, and Narwhal was like that, you know, as well. I stumble across him, but it's great to see somebody who hasn't popped yet, you know, and it's very rare because usually you only see people once someone else is discovered. But yeah, it's a real treat.
Yeah, that is. I'm excited about that. Good. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. He's such a good guy.
You know, we've never spoken actually. We just speak over email. I've never heard his voice. Where is he actually from?
I think the Pacific Northwest.
Right. So I thought he was maybe European because I know he's got a European name.
He's got a European name, and let's face it, he's kind of weird like a European, you know. I think it's the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm excited. That blows me away. Good for you. Good for you, Narwhal. Yeah.
I'll send you a little towards Christmas. I'll send you a little advanced copy of it. You know.
Oh, thank you.
Nice.
Yeah, he's from Washington State. People tell him. Yes. I thought I didn't want to narrow it down because I thought I'd be wrong. Portlandish. Yeah. Oh, that is awesome. So, that must be fun for you. You just go around comic book Twitter. And I like this guy and make their career.
And my pitch is the same every time. Like it used to be before I went to Netflix when it was a create your own thing, where there was no TV or movie attached. I used to always say, look, I'll pay. Why be 1,000 when you can be a millionaire? You know, come and work with me. You know? And it used to work every time, you know. And even at Netflix, I've managed. The Netflix guys are super generous. You know, I said, look, I can never get really good people unless we pay them more than Marvel and DC. So that's a great pitch as well. I love to say, you know, what's Marvel paying you? What's DC paying you? We'll pay you more, you know. And we get them almost every time. I think in all these years, there's been like 2 guys we didn't get, you know. So it's nice.
It's supposed to ask you about Kneegate. I'm sure somebody's trying to embroil me into some drama that I don't understand.
Yeah, I don't get that.
Yeah, Peter, that's his real name, Peter, right? Peter.
I don't want to say it, but it's
yeah. I was about to say that, and then I realized it's not my information, but I got carried away. Yeah. It's funny. He said, did anybody back Foreign Agent? He only sold like 39 copies originally, and people are on eBay buying it. And I'm like, wow. Like I actually got that. Like, should I sell this? But I'm like, no. I'm one of those 39 people. I don't want to sell my copy. You know? my wife is. I tell my wife the value of my comics because my big fear. Like, can you imagine if I crashed into this tree and my airbag didn't deploy and I'm gone? And she's just telling people, get this crap out of my house.
Oh. Do you know what I keep meaning to do? I've got a pretty good original art collection, and a lot of the big ones are framed and up. And I've built a gallery downstairs. You know, there's a big gallery as you come into your sort of lower level, and I've got a page from everything I've ever worked on. You know, on one wall running all the way down this part of the house, and some of it's quite valuable. And I keep meaning to put stickers on the back to the children for when I die at some point, you know.
Give each bit a color, right?
Yeah, like a rough estimate of what this is worth, because they're just going to bin it otherwise, you know. Like I need to let them know, you know, that this stuff is valuable. And I bought a lot of Silver Age art as well, you know. Like I've got some really good Silver Age art, and I want the kids to know, look, this isn't copies, this is like original comic art, you know. Don't bin this.
Are your kids in? I know your one daughter is, but are your kids as a whole, are they into comics?
Well, my oldest daughter, she's done her first 2 graphic novels. She didn't she loves movies. She loves artwork. She's a professional artist. She didn't grow up with Marvel and DC. They didn't really. She read a little bit of it, but she didn't quite get into it the way I did. It was a generational thing. So she got more into manga and everything. You know, she grew up liking more current stuff, I guess. But what's amazing is my
wife said, "Don't worry, she knows how much my comics are worth."
But you know, she likes comics, but she's more into creating her own than Kirby's Fantastic Four or whatever, you know. So I didn't expect any of my kids then to get into them. But then my middle kid, like I told you in lockdown, she became obsessed with Silver Age DC. And my youngest kid is really into Dogman and that kind of thing, starting to kind of move a little bit into comics now, you know. So my dream is that they all become comic people, of course. You know, that'd be amazing. I've got 3 daughters, so I feel like King Lear. You know, I like the idea of like, you know, the kingdom gets passed on to them.
I don't have any children, so like my nieces and nephews are all like, "Remember me, Uncle John?" I'm like, "You got to start visiting. You got to start visiting, guys."
Well, weirdly, a lot of my nephews get into comics. I've got there's 53 of us now. Like, see, just me, my brothers, my sister, and our children, and my brothers have got grandchildren as well. There's 53 of us now, right? There's so many.
I'm one of 7, so
yeah. So
we
are you
had to build an extension onto my parents' house to have Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner.
Are you guys Catholics?
Yeah, Irish. My mother's Irish, my father's Italian. So
see, my mum was from a family of 12. I mean, there was millions of us, you know.
Yeah.
So like, so in amongst all that, you've got comic book fans.
No,
so
I'm the only one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm the only. My older brother dabbled in it, and I think
Yeah.
he got me into it by buying stuff, and as quickly as he got in, he got out. But he's a sports guy, but he's into horror movies. You talk about horror movies, my brother knows that. But nobody. And I'll say I got 55 nieces and nephews right now. I'd say about 25, maybe 30 read manga. None of them read comics.
That's really interesting. I overheard the most amazing thing. I was standing in the bookstore a few months ago, and I heard these two kids talking to each other, and one said, "Oh, do you read manga?" And the other one said, "No, but I keep meaning to." And I thought, how awesome is that? That it's an aspirational thing to read manga, so there's a lot to be learned there.
Yeah. I hope what you said is true, that it's just like a cycle that comics come back. But I just felt like in this age of billion-dollar superhero movies, I think Marvel and DC just failed to capitalize on getting people to go to the comic book stores. Like, I don't know how they could have catastrophically failed to utilize that.
It is, I mean, I love the guys, so I mean no criticism.
Yeah, I know you. I'm talking about your friends. I'm not trying to hurt.
But at the same time, it is insane that there's $2.7 billion coming in on Avengers, and none of the main Marvel characters were themselves in the comic books at the time. So
I don't want to get into that.
But not Tony Stark. I mean, it's completely crazy, But like,
I had my friend who ran the comic book.
No idea what everyone was smoking.
He said once a week a family would come in. "Oh, we're the Avengers," and then like, this isn't Captain America. This isn't Thor. And not only is it not Thor, but it's a woman with cancer. I'm like, and then they buy Pokemon cards and they never see it again. And then you defended the comic book store that was bringing that up.
Yeah. I know it. Everyone was like, "Shh, there's a conspiracy of silence here. Let's keep this all quiet."
Right.
But yeah, it was insane, total insanity. It'll go down in history, I think, as one of the oddest decisions. What we needed was you doing the electrics in the office that day. What the hell are you guys thinking? Get Tony Stark.
I'm still. You've seen what's the name of the Annie Hall, the Woody Allen movie?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You remember the guys on? And he's talking about the movie Marshall McLuhan, and then Woody Allen goes, "You know nothing about Marshall." I just have. That's what I felt like doing, getting off the list. You know nothing about the Inhumans. The Inhumans debuted in Jack Kirby, Fantastic Four, back, and then go back up, and then, like, what would they do? I would never be like, in my mind, they're gonna make me head editor of the group events, but in reality, I'm on the unemployment line going to another electrical shop.
I had a similar thing. I was getting my hair cut about 3 years ago, and there was some guys talking about the Logan movie, and they were the guy sitting beside me getting his hair cut. The hairdresser, the two of them were talking about the Logan movie. He said, "It's based on a comic book," and my ears just perked up. And they weren't. I wasn't in the conversation. I was just listening, And they didn't know me at all or anything, and the guy said, yeah, and he was given all the wrong information about the comic. Everything was wrong. And it was a similar situation where I had to bite my lip, and not say anything. And he made it sound so bad. I was desperate to butt in and tell him what really happened.
Well, it's because Logan's a robot, and a robot comes, oh my God. Oh my God, that's painful. That's painful to hear. Yeah, guys at work, they'll talk. Everyone's, "Oh, John's into comics," and they'll talk. And I don't want to be actually, and correct them. And I just, yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Another thing that guys do is they, "Oh, I got so many comics. You want to see them?" And one guy was like, he was getting divorced. Poor guy, just a really good worker, just a good guy. And he had this shoebox filled with comics, like a big He's like, you want to buy them? Because he needed money. I'm like, okay. So he shows it, and it's all like 90s comics, like The Death of Superman, stuff like that. So they're worthless. But I like him. I go, I'll give you $200 for the box. And you just see his face. I'll keep them. Like, he thought he had thousands of dollars worth of comics. That happens every few months at my job. Guys, oh, look at these. They bring them to work. They're all excited. I'm like,
It's funny, isn't it? Like, we've got such a weird expert eye. We can just tell instantly, can't we? And it's all the years we've been doing it. I find that with the artwork as well. Like, it's a really weird thing that we can look at any comic and tell you who drew it. Like, most people can't do this. So we've got this weird skill set, haven't we? It's great.
Like I said, you did it to impress girls. I did it because girls weren't impressed. I got to ask you my standard question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you play Dungeons and Dragons? Like, that's my two things. I
missed that because in the UK, it didn't come until a little bit later from when it came in the US. And I was actually probably a year or two too old. There was a couple of things I was too old for. Like, I missed Thundercats. I missed Dungeons and Dragons.
Too old for that.
Transformers, G.I. Joe. I just missed them by about 2 years. So my friends who are 2 years younger than me are obsessed with all of these things. Obsessed.
Yeah. I missed G.I. Joe, Thundercats, He-Man, and Transformers, and the what's the other Power Rangers?
Power Rangers. That was a few years later again. Yeah. So, and the Turtles as well. So I missed all that stuff. But but Dungeons and Dragons, it's weird because now as an adult, I meet so many guys. I don't mean comic guys. I mean just like school dads who play D&D, like massive, and guys you would not expect. Like, one guy's an advisor to the Prime Minister here that is in the government. There's another guy who runs a bank and all that. It's like guys with really adult jobs. And they all meet up and they play D&D like once a month.
That is awesome. I joke around that if my comic, the $100,000 stretch goal is I'm flying all my friends, like Brian Bauer will play Wolf and Batsy, and Fabrizio will be, and you come, you be Nemesis, you be the bad guy. We'll all sit around my table, we'll play a D&D as our characters.
Well, do you know what? It's funny, my kids are kind of interested in it. And my youngest kid is really, really getting into dragons. Like, she's obsessed with dragons. Like, she paints them all the time and everything. She's 10. And she saw D&D in a game shop that we pass quite a lot. And she wants to go in, and I might get into it so I can play it with her, because she's only 10, so none of her friends are into it yet. But I might get into it so that she's got someone to play with it.
This is what I play. It's a superhero role playing game.
I saw that years ago. That's been
it came out like 1982. I'm not even joking. I bought 12 copies because I thought it would be impossible. So like, as they get worn through, I just rip out another one. I write all my notes back into the new. And me and my friends, we still play on Sundays. We pretend we're superheroes and we play, and
How long does the game take?
Well, we used to do like a 12-hour session, But as we get older and they have kids, we'll do 3 or 4 hours. I try to tailor, but then these guys will spend 4 hours deciding the lineup order to go into the store because who's going to get shot first. But I'm like, it doesn't matter, you guys. You're all superheroes. Just go running in.
Well, my friends, the banking guy in particular, like he arranges a thing at his house. Like, he gets like food in and everything, and the guys will stay like a night or two. They'll do a Friday night, sometimes into a Sunday morning.
I did that for my 50th birthday. I rented a hotel and I got a party room just so all my friends could come and we could game for the entire weekend. We got food ordered in, we got beers ordered in. But that was my wife's suggestion, guys. My wife is wonderful. She best suggestion ever. 50th birthday, week-long gaming session.
I often think how lucky we are, right, that we're into all these things. Because I always think, like, imagine you weren't into superheroes and you weren't into movies and you weren't into D&D or whatever, Like, there's so many things we've got to look forward to, isn't there? Like, I think, see if you're just a guy who likes baseball or something and there's the occasional baseball game, it's kind of, they're all much the same, really, aren't they, But we're into so many things. I think at any given point in my life, there's 40 things I'm looking forward to. You know? And I just think how lucky we are that we somehow get bitten by that radioactive spider. Like, how the hell did that happen? But it's great, isn't it? I love it.
All the nerds grew up and got the good jobs. That's what happened.
Yeah, we all got good jobs too. Yeah. Although I remember in school, it's funny, I remember one of my careers officers, like, I was reasonably academic and they were almost pushing me into other things. And they said, look, this information that you're storing is not useful, nobody when you're older is going to ask you about Batman's secret identity. And I was like, yes, they do. This is amazing. They ask me about it all the time.
You know? About all the colors of kryptonite. Go ahead, I dare you.
That's one thing I'm very proud of. Like, all three of my daughters can name every color of kryptonite and also tell you what they can do. You know that white kryptonite kills plant life. Like, I love that they know this. It's amazing.
And does your wife just roll her eyes, or does she's amused by this?
I think she likes the eccentricity. We have this theory, right? Like, this is my wife and I's theory in terms of raising children, is that if your kid is just like everyone else, they will have an absolutely average life at best. But if your kid has eccentricities and interests, then they could have an exceptional life, because they'll be into stuff that other people don't know about, you know.
I was just talking the other day that, like, we all pretend to value the individual, but then when we meet a true individual person, especially in school, we bust on them. You know what I mean? Like, I was a weirdo. Like, I played football, but I played Dungeons & Dragons, and I also read comic books. I kept all that a secret. Everybody knew I played football.
Yeah.
How could you not? How could you hide? Yeah. But I kept Dungeons & Dragons secret because I was afraid that I was a football player and afraid to get teased. Can you imagine that little socially awkward person? So yeah, I think that's great that you encourage these eccentricities in your kids. You know, that is awesome.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, because I just think they'll grow up, and if they're interested in kids, they'll become interested in adults. That's
absolutely. Yeah. I'm having so much fun, but I got Jacob DeMatteis coming on in a half hour.
I was going to say I better make tracks as well. It's 11:25.
Yeah. Oh wow, thank you so much.
The downside of kids is they actually get up about 5:30 or 6 a.m. in the morning. It's a nightmare. So like, I'm going to get about 6 hours sleep. So
I wake up at 4:30 when I'm working. Right now, I'm in limbo. I just,
What time do you go to bed for a 4:30?
I go to bed at 9:30 during work. Right. That's why when I was like, yeah, I'll do whatever you want now. Now I'm on, because of this thing, I can talk whenever you want. But that's why it was so hard to talk to you, because when you wanted to talk, I'm in bed. I'm an early guy. I'm waking up at 4:30 in the morning for work.
Yeah. Well, listen, continue to improve, get better, and I hope it all goes well for you. And it's been great talking to you as well.
Yeah, I was so nervous. You could tell about my wife. She was like, I was sitting in this chair for hours going, what? I was so nervous. So thank you so much. You were.
No, it's all. And, I love it because there is no better chat. It's like the back of a comic store, when you get behind the scenes at a comic store and you can all just chew the cud. I love it, so.
That's what I envisioned this whole channel was to be, like a proxy for the comic book store that we just, and that's on Friday nights. I do It's Clobbering Time, where we, this week, who would win in a fight, the original X-Men or the original Doom Patrol? Open invite. We just talk, and it's been so much fun, just comic book stuff, because we're all around the world. We can't get together in person anymore,
Yeah. But then what's amazing is we can actually connect like this as well, because if you lived in Scotland, your chances of talking comics with a guy in New York was literally zero. Really, whereas now everybody's talking all over the world. The internet's brought everyone together.
And you're recommending comics that I'd never heard before, and I got guys all around talking. Like, I'm also into old punk rock, so I'll talk to other, like, I never heard of this band, and now I'm buying old 45s and stuff. It's so much fun.
Great.
So, I didn't even get to talk to you about music yet. Next time we'll talk punk.
Well, my big flex is I saw the Sex Pistols live back in the day. So one of the nice things about being British,
I never saw one of my favorite bands. Nevermind the Bollocks is one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time. And that's something that bothers me. I was too old to get into He-Man and all this stuff. Too young to see the original, old school punkers.
Well, I saw them in the late 80s. It was a little bit later, but after punk had kind of subsided, Acid House had kind of come in by that point. But it was still the Sex Pistols live. It was exciting.
And local band few is what, Stiff Little Fingers, right?
Yeah. There's actually, like, when I grew up at a time when there was tons of great Scottish bands coming through. Like, even guys like the Proclaimers, who weren't a sort of cool band or anything, but massive international success. Huge. That's the worst thing. Like, I got glasses my first ever pair of glasses about 3 months ago, and when I put them on, I look exactly like one of the Proclaimers. It's absolutely. So I'm scared to actually put them on in real life.
There you go. Yeah, you could march. Do that. Oh wow! I'm flabbergasted. This is such a fun talk. I would talk to you for another hour, but like I said, this is like the most greatest day ever. I'm talking to Mark Millar, and now I got a JM DeMatteis coming on.
Well, tell him hello. He knows I love him. I've had him before, but like he's great, and good luck with his new ventures as well. It all looks great.
He's doing Kickstarter stuff. Check it out. I think today's his last day on Kickstarter. If you
do you know I should back that as well? Like
it's really good.
I don't know how to do it. I can't work the computer. I'll have to, once my wife wakes up tomorrow morning, I'll get her. Hopefully,
I had to have my friend come over and hook up StreamYard for me so I could actually do these interviews. I'm an old. I'll build your house, but I don't know how to do computers or anything like that.
The house is more useful.
The house is more useful. But thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks, 350 people watching. Thank you. If I missed your super chat, it's because I'm just excited. I apologize. Thanks a lot, Mark. You got Mark Millar. I keep saying Millar. You got Nemesis coming out. You got Prodigy coming out. Oh, and I had one big question I wanted to ask you, and I didn't ask. I'll save it for next time. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody.
See you later. Bye then.